Hello, and welcome to the final episode of Movies That Matter. I'm Nicole, and with me today are...
Stacy,
Adam,
Garret,
Lexy.
and Justin.
So before we get into why we are saying our goodbye today, I would like, for the record, Stacy to tell us our origin story.
sure. It was I wish it was something more exciting, but yeah, it was just I think I felt at the time like it was a tumultuous time, sort of socio-politically, and I felt like I needed to do something to express things that I was observing and just kind of process what was happening around us, and so I wanted to start a podcast where people, we could talk about the things that were being explored in movies, which at the time was happening a lot, right? That was a forum, a medium where that was this kind of discussion was happening. But I didn't know who else would want to talk about nerdy stuff like that with me and record it. And until a mutual friend said, well, my friend Nicole likes talking about movies and, socio-political issues. You guys should give it a try. And Nicole just came over to my house and was completely game to just try this new thing and commit to it. And I guess, I know it's a cliche, but the rest is history.
Yeah, and so we are the final five, but I will say shout out to Spencer, Sari, Jen, and Garret E, and Christopher, who we have lost along the way. All made incredible contributions to the podcasts over the years and had to move on with other things. So, this is the final episode because it's been 9 long years and 150 episodes. And number one, I think we've put on, on audio tape everything that we wanted to say. And number two, the deciding factor for me was the Oscars. When I saw sort of what the big award season movies were and how much I did not want to see any of them, I just thought things have changed. Movies have changed. I've been like, oh, it's the writer's strike. Oh, it's the pandemic. Oh, it's this and that. But the fact of the matter is coming up with a movie that matter, even every month, was becoming such a struggle. And I just thought, I am fighting such an uphill battle for something that is a hobby.
Yeah, it felt like there was a change in the winds, right?
Very much so. And, the community that we've created for me is the best part about making this podcast, but none of y'all are walking out of my life. So I think it's time to stop recording our conversations and just have them and maybe finally go see a movie together. Because I don't think I've ever seen a movie with Garret.
That is a true statement. A rule on the podcast used to be we didn't want to see movies together, so we wouldn't talk about them before our podcast. So everything you would hear on the podcast was a fresh take the first time we'd really talked about it with each other. And,
With two major exceptions.
Two major exceptions, yes. But it's like, we don't need a podcast to sit around and talk about movies together. This podcast was meant to bring something to our lives and hopefully to all of our listeners that really gave us something to think about. And I think you said it best, Nicole. I think I've said almost every opinion I've had over the last, I've only been here since 2018, but I've said a lot. And it's been a really, really lovely ride, but doesn't mean it's ending. It means we're going to stop recording our conversations. I like that. Like, it doesn't mean we're going to stop talking about political movies in a fashion that talks about social change. It means that we're going to stop recording them. And I think that's kind of a beautiful sentiment.
So the prompt for this given to us by Garret was some of your memorable moments, your most memorable moments being on Movies That Matter. So I will go reverse chronological order this time. Let Justin kick us off.
All right, so I was thinking about how I wanted to respond to Garrett's prompt since I'm the most recent member of this podcast. And I'd say there are a couple moments that really stand out. I have three. The first I would say is the first podcast I recorded on here, which was Nope with Nicole. First time I'd ever recorded a podcast. Not sure if it came through, but I had a lot of nerves, but on my end. But I felt a lot more comfortable afterwards, and it was just great. First time doing something like this, and it was a great experience that I wanted to continue. And then the other two memorable moments I have are one is when we did the Across the Spider Verse or Across the Spider Verse. It was me, Nicole, and Stacy. That was fun because Stacy and I were able to convince Nicole, hey, check out this animated superhero movie, which I know she has some skepticism on, but everyone ended up really liking it, so that stood out to me. And the third one I had is when we did Killers of the Flower Moon. Got to have one of my colleagues come in who was Native American, and she offered a very unique perspective on that movie. And I thought that was just a fantastic opportunity we had to get Marietta's perspective on that movie and just, being a Native American woman in America.
And she was a natural. She was so good at podcasting, like off the bat. Like she was the easiest guest we ever had because she just got it right away. Like if she got interrupted, she'd go back and repeat herself. She was amazing. All right, Lexy, some memorable moments.
I'm glad that Justin had three because I was also thinking of three. I will share my three. I think probably a theme with all of us might be like first episode because I think similarly to Justin, my first episode I was trying to look up was in 2019 for Captain Marvel, and I think it was similarly. You've never done something like this before, and you're wondering if you're going to be good enough and how you're going to come across, and listening also to the existing episodes and trying to be in line with that. And so it was a fun experience to go over to Nicole's old house or apartment and record together with her mic, and then it was also just a fun experience talking about movies. And then one of my other ones is when we did like our first episode of Impact 10. It was during lockdown for COVID, and we were we had been previously recording in person, and we also wanted to try something new, recording individually but also video. And we did kind of a combo where we had individual parts and then we had a group discussion at the end. And it was just, it was like a, kind of new frontier of trying this new format based on, compared to like the existing podcast episodes. And I remember having to like record on my computer and try and do it all in one take, which was hard at first. And trying to, get that practice and be, we're not, we're not content creators as our first jobs. And so, trying to be like, and like, I'm doing like motioning, trying to be like kind of more out there for the camera because that's kind of what's needed. So that process was fun and interesting. We did a couple episodes of that series. And then my last one was our AwesomeCon panel. That was also kind of a new frontier of I'm assuming first fully live, kind of episode. I think we did record it as an episode. We recorded the planning of it, and then I think recorded the actual panel. But just also fun new frontier of talking about movies and also engaging with a live audience. That was really cool too. So those are my three.
It's interesting because I sit here kind of in the middle, so I got to see things and hear things that like people before me brought, and then I got to see people after me. And I remember the first time I actually met Nicole. It's one of my favorite memories because other Garret who used to record on this podcast was like, hey, I have this friend who does this podcast and likes to talk about movies. just want to kind of like see if you guys might click. We're looking to kind of expand some repertoire on the podcast. I was like, oh yeah, I love movies. It's really great. Let's go. And Nicole and I sat in the bottom of this basement bar and talked about the sound editing of Annihilation for like an hour and a half. And I was just like, I told the other Garret, I was like, wow, that was really fun, really enjoyable. He's like, you really know what you're talking about. I was like, I just know some cool stuff about movies. And from there, I always like to hear when Nicole tells the story, she was like, that's how I knew he was going to be great for the podcast. When he wanted to talk about sound editing for an hour and a half, I knew that was the end. But I've had some really lovely memories on this podcast. And I think we talk about podcast specific. Our first one, my first ever actually recorded was the first short segment we'd ever done when we did Bow, the little short before The Incredibles 2. We actually recorded that first. Nicole's like, we can get the jitters out. If it doesn't sound good, we can let it go. And it actually was just like a really short 7-minute, I think, segment on Bow, the short. And it was lovely. And then I did The Incredibles because I don't know if you guys have ever listened to the podcast, but I'm the kids expert here, apparently. I have done so many of the children's movies. But I really have enjoyed that. Going in to see a movie in a packed auditorium full of kids, and I'm like, oh, I get to go talk about social change, but you also get to sit here and enjoy this. It's been really lovely. AwesomeCon is hard to top because that was the first time I had really seen us shine in a professional capacity. Like we went in there and we did it and we rocked that panel. We had a packed room, people fighting for seats for our panel at AwesomeCon. And, it started, I think, from the Impact 10s. Cult Classics will always be one of my favorite podcasts because it was just so fun to sit there and talk about these like cult classic movies with your friend. And you're like, oh, seen it. If you haven't seen it, definitely need to see it now. But of all the memories I've had over the years, I think it's hard to encapsulate a favorite memory because there's the podcast that made me cry. There's the podcast that made me laugh. There's the moments I get to sit in a room with my friends and just have a conversation, regardless if I think it's a good idea or a bad idea, and just process what I'm thinking and get to have raw, in the moment feedback with my friends on what's really important to me and what's important to them. And it's the friendships really, I know this sounds cheesy, but it's the friendships we've made outside of these podcasts. The interest now I share with some people on this podcast because I would never have known. The times we show up for each other, events, parties, get-togethers, holidays. Those are my memories that I enjoy. And it wouldn't be possible if I didn't have the podcast. And I think those are my favorite memories on the podcast are varied depending on what day of the week it is and what mood and what I want to go back and like kind of reminisce on. But it's everybody who's sitting here and the people who are not, who have made this an amazing space to be in. And that's hard to beat.
Sure would hate to follow that. I've been thinking about this a lot the last few days. And one of the things I liked about doing this from the very beginning was it was kind of a way to sort of engage and talk about movies in a sort of non-academic way. I don't know if any of you guys had the dream as a kid to be a movie critic because you'd get to watch movies for a living. But I interned with one in high school, and having followed several, it seems like kind of like a way for the fun to go out of it. And this never felt like that. This always felt like almost like you're hanging out and producing content in a really like fun way where it's the focus is on, just the content and seeing movies rather than producing a piece or stuff like that. So the first episode I did was the Miss Sloan episode almost 9 years ago. And I was also super nervous, but only for like a few minutes because it was just so easy and effortless. And we just were sitting around drinking and talking about how crazy it was that Toronto was subbing for DC in that movie. And I also had I guess I also have three specific memories, like the ones where I first was recording with people other than Nicole. Stacy, I think our first one was Blade Runner. Justin Renfield and Lexy, the Exorcist believer. It was just, and big regret not ever getting to do an episode with Garret, but yeah, we all got them. But just being able to kind of like gel right away and again just sit and talk about the movies and have a good time was so much fun. The time Nicole and I got to trash talk Babylon for over an hour straight felt so good. And I guess it's kind of like the old quote, the smallest amount of power that ever went to anybody's head. But just being able to kind of like get that out in the world that was a little bit more than people that have to be in the same room as me felt good. But my favorite memory, I'll go with the positive one, was when Nicole and I did Yesterday, which was a movie I was not looking forward to seeing. I don't care for the Beatles, and I don't care for like what if this thing disappeared in the world of movies. So it kind of was like engineered in a lab for me to hate this movie. And I went to it, and it was just utterly charming. Ed Sheeran, who I also don't like, was hilarious in it, and it kind of opened my mind a little bit. I know that sounds silly, but it's like, okay, well, like here's a perfect example of giving something a chance that you think you're going to hate, and it ends up being really nice. And I think you also liked it as well, Nicole. So it was like a nice, positive experience. And again, it's not work. It never felt like work, even though it wasn't a movie I wanted to see. That was, it has been the most fun thing about this is that it was never like a chore. It always has been like when we've done these in the middle of the week, it's like a fun thing to do on a weeknight to get together for an hour and do this stuff. And it's been a real blast for, like I said, almost 9 years.
Yeah, it has been, and it's hard to believe it's 9 years. I know that's such a cliche, but it's just, yeah, the time.
We've gone
time
from Trump
is a funny thing.
And back to Trump again.
Exactly. It came out of the frustration of a very particular moment, and we do, genuinely seem to have come full circle. And so perhaps it is appropriate that things are wrapping up when they are. But I think the moments that, when I was thinking about it, the moments that were my favorites were the times that the podcast made me feel more connected, just in general. So like Lexy mentioned Awesome Con, our which was kind of a journey that like reflected the COVID era, right? We were really excited and optimistic at the beginning, finding out that we were going to get to do Awesome Con, that we had been invited, and then it all just kind of fell apart. But during that time, we got to do the recordings that ultimately were shared at AwesomeCon online for the remote version that year. And then as Lexi mentioned, and I think some others mentioned, the impact shows kept us talking about movies and making content together at a time when it was, we were all quite isolated and lonely. And then finally getting to come together in a big room full of, it's like we overcorrected. We were connected in this like very personal, physical way. There was everybody right there. The people the listeners that we normally never see, never hear, and they were all just like, they're all these people just right there reacting in real time to things to our thoughts that we were sharing. And that was so, and then coming up to us afterwards, like rushing the stage at the end to like give us their thoughts about movie villains in comic book movies. So those were some really special times. Strangely, one of my favorite moments is when Nicole and I recorded Hostiles, and I was in Scotland at the time. And we recorded this, what I thought was a really great episode, and I was really proud of it. And I felt like it was good work that we had done, only to find out that I hadn't recorded a single second on my end. So all we had was an hour of Nicole kind of talking to herself and then pausing occasionally. and I was absolutely devastated. I was so mad at myself, and Nicole was so gracious and patient. It was just like, it's okay. We'll give it a minute. We'll come back tomorrow. And we'll just do it again, okay? And I really appreciated that, because I was, on my own in Scotland at the time. So again, it made me feel more connected. And then I guess I gotta mention how amazing it felt for Michael Showalter to respond to our Twitter comments about Hello, My Name is Doris, our first episode, and then The Big Sick, which came later. And we were just kind of fangirling about him, and he actually responded, because we had said, what did we said to him? We had just mentioned that he did really great rom-com homages, and we weren't sure if it was more like satire or out of love, or a true homage, and he responded that it was absolutely 100% out of love every time. So there are little gems like that that I feel really blessed to have to take with me from here.
Yeah, that was the one of two notable exceptions to the fresh mic, the second being with Garret, and I forgot to turn the recording back on for Triangle of Sadness. Very memorable moments. Yeah, it's been a long 9 years. So I think I'm going to tag on something Adam said. Two of my memorable moments. There has been nothing more satisfying than just getting to have a rant about a movie that I hated. I did this to two of you where I was like, no, shut up. I'm just going to yell at the mic and you were just going to sit here and let me do it. I did it to Stacy, our very second episode of The Lobster. I hated that movie so much and I could not wait to yell about it. And I did it to Lexy for Challengers. There was something so satisfying about that. And there have obviously been so many memorable moments, but I think out of all the ones that stand out over the years, I kind of keep coming back to our Get Out episode. So it was me and Stacy and Suri, and we recorded our episode, and I think we sat at my table and talked for an hour and a half more about the movie. And I always thought I should have I should have recorded it. I should have done a double episode. Either way, it's lost to history, but there was so much we had to say, and we just kept talking even when the mic was off. So I think, yeah, obviously the connections I've made along the way. Stacy and I were not friends before this started. Garret and I were not friends before this started. I've said this before. I got to be a guest at two of the hosts' weddings and talk to their parents who knew who I was from the podcast, which was really amazing. So it's brought so much good stuff into my life, and it's really hard to let go, but I am having a hard time finding the joy these days. I don't know how other people are feeling.
Well, I think it's important to remember it's we're not letting go of each other. We're letting go of sitting down to record our conversations. And I can't tell you the number of times all of us you should see our text chain, audience, because you would think all we do is talk about movies nonstop. And that's what the things you don't see, the work that goes into this. It may seem like we just get up there and talk about social change and it's pretty easy for an hour and we get to sit around and drink with our friends. That's a great part. But there was a time that we were seeing a movie every week. We were all going out. But it's the thought behind it. You can tell people are wanting to make sure that there's something to be said. And sometimes the best surprise is when you go to see a movie at the end of the year and Wonka turns out to be a musical and you have nothing to say about the movie except for just have some joy in your life once in a while. That we also get taught lessons during these podcasts. Things come up for us. I mean, you hear all of us share emotional stories during these podcasts at times. You hear us talk about our personal lives. You hear us talk about things that necessarily we wouldn't probably share with the average person. But this platform gave us a space to feel connected. This platform gave us a space to feel supported. And now, right now, sitting here, February 2025, it is hard to find the joy in things. The world is not a great place right now. But what we do have is a group of people who have sat here and talked about movies in such a loving way that when we go to bars or we go to hangouts and everything, people are always like, oh, you guys are on a movie podcast? That's so dope. And we get to engage with all these strangers who sit there and want to talk to us about movies. And then we have, like these crazy conversations about what if vampires were real? What would they actually do? Or, the war on drugs was captured best in which movie? Like things that, like topics that go, is all spaghetti westerns the same? Like some of my favorite memories is not the tangible things that people have heard. It's the look across at somebody after you're recording a podcast after they make a really good point. You're like, oh, you just did the thing. You said that. You did the thing right now. Like, it's a ever unending journey on this podcast because we say so many things off camera that you don't hear. And Nicole does an excellent job of editing us to make us sound much better than we do because sometimes we talk for too long, like I'm doing now. But it's just the memories you'll never see and the memories you'll never get to hear are the cuts we had to take out because we said too many curse words, or the
Adam, biggest offender. Adam, biggest offender on curse words and popping, cracking ankles.
I'm also sitting in a noisy chair right now.
Yeah.
I managed to not make noisy.
The saga of the Nicole and her noisy chairs.
I always found the one that was the most noisy. I just want to piggyback on something Garret said, actually, where as far as moving forward, this for me has given me a tremendous amount of sort of like confidence in, not to sound self-centered, but like what I think and what, I have to say about this stuff that we watch. And I like to think when I look at this is my 20th recording. But when I look over what I've done, I like to think that I've gotten better at it. And it's because I was with you guys and doing it with you all, but also like just being like doing it kind of gave me sort of like the confidence as well that, what we have to say and what we think about this stuff, that matters as well. And it will continue to do so. The content is not amazing out there, strictly in the world of entertainment. As we said, it's like tough now to find movies that, like, let alone for this, that I want to see at all. But we still got really good at talking about this stuff and are really good about talking about this stuff. That's not going to go away,
Yeah, I just like to say that this has been a fantastic opportunity, and if I hadn't met Nicole at one of Nick and Carrie's, get-together, I would have never met the rest of you all. But I'm very fortunate that life took that turn, and I've gotten to meet all of you all. And as Adam and Garret and really everyone has highlighted, this has just been a fantastic opportunity, and I feel like this experience has. It's been a great journey and a really worthwhile one. And I just like we've all said, this isn't the end. We are still going to be hanging out. It's just the end of this iteration of us discussing movies. But been so glad to be part of this journey.
No, I agree, and also thinking about noises. I remember Nicole eventually was telling me, "You got to drink water before we record because you're making some sort of noise with your." I don't know, my lips or whatever, but I was like, oh, okay, I gotta, the noises that you don't think about when you sit down to record a podcast and then Nicole is editing it. But branching off of, the work that goes into this podcast, and a big, thank you to Nicole, who was, scheduling us and, taking our preferences for movies and making a schedule and thinking about timing and, then the recording and then the post-production of editing the episodes. And when we did Impact 10, editing the video together, she learned so many skills and, did so much work along the way. And I think it'll be a nice new era of us, going to the movies that we want to go see and just talking when we want to talk about them. even if it's offline and we don't get to engage as much with people who listen. But yeah, also to piggyback on what people have been saying, that I met Nicole through work at my last job, and I think after a couple of conversations, it became clear that we both liked movies, and then kind of progressed from there into one of my most cherished friendships, and then so nice to like meet all of you guys. And I think we all live, because we all kind of came through this podcast, we all have our kind of other friend groups and our other lives, but I always cherish the moments where we hang out together, and I just feel so refreshed after those moments.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from each of you guys. Just having these discussions and spending time with you when I've been able to, is just I've been getting to hear perspectives I wouldn't have got to hear otherwise, and I'm pretty grateful for that. I'm grateful for Nicole's commitment and leadership that always came so naturally. The podcast is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's not easy to inspire people to commit their time to organize in this way. And you've always done that. You've done it for 9 years, and that's an achievement. We've got, how many hours of content do we have? Has anyone done the math? I don't even know.
No.
And it's gonna live out there. That's gonna be not a forever legacy, but a for some time legacy, and that's kind of incredible.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually something, that's a good point. Like, one of the things I was sort of surprised and heartened by, and partly why I was able to keep it going for so long, was that everyone was really dedicated. Like, no one ever missed an episode. Someone got caught up at work like one time and was like 20 minutes late or something, but like no one ever flaked on their responsibility to the podcast or on me. Like, it's really made it very easy, because I knew when I put things in the schedule, then that was going to stick. Everyone took it really seriously. Yeah, it's weird to think it's been 9 years. Really hasn't seemed like it in so many ways. And I feel like the thing that, sorry, trying to not get emotional here. I feel like we made something really good. And I think that's what's so important to me. Beyond, obviously, the friendships is the most important part, and the connections and the relationships. But I am really proud of what we made. I have heard other independent podcasts, and I don't tend to like them, because I think they are meandering and they get too personal, and for whatever, all these different things. And I think like we made a really solid product. Like, we made good content. We did say things that were interesting and insightful, and I'm just really proud of the work that we've done. And I think that's also why I think it's time to say goodbye, is because I'm just not sure I personally have anything interesting left to say. And I think that
that'll do, Pig.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just hard. It's hard to think of the world we live in now and trying to talk about it. We said all this stuff before and it got worse. And I'm like, I don't know what else to say.
But we spoke.
Yeah, that was our act of rebellion.
We said something.
I was gonna say, even on a less grand stage, I think I've learned so much from either listening to other people's episodes or the joint episodes, and from Nicole, and either whether it's learning about the way that other people analyze movies and what they look at, or how they perceive a certain thing that we both watched. And I think I've heard Nicole say multiple times, the more interesting episodes are the ones where we disagree. Even though I don't like to disagree with people, but makes for an interesting conversation. And it was like, oh, I really gotta like defend myself with my point on this movie. And so yeah, even like world politics aside, I think the conversations where you get to bring different things to the table have always been so informative to me and have changed my recollection of movies, after the fact, or made me think a different way about them.
That's a good point. Some of the best episodes were the ones where I felt one way about a movie at the start of the episode and a totally different way about it at the end. And that's happened on more than one occasion.
I just want to echo a lot of people commending Nicole, because it's easy for us to get up and talk about movies because we get to go drink wine and talk about movies and leave. Nicole then has to listen to the episode multiple times and edit it and go through. And the hours you poured in, Nicole, don't just show in the quality of what you're saying, but standards at which you've set us to record. Number of times in the old apartment that she was like, no, there's a police car going by, say it again. Or Jane having to take a moment to get herself together while she was having a fit while we were recording, or having to record an entire hour of Triangle of Sadness after another bottle of wine again was very, very fun. But it's Nicole and I have had this conversation that we think quite alike. But then we get into talk about movies and we often disagree on what the moral of the movie was. And I didn't get to do a lot of group ones, but the ones I did when we got to do, and again, Adam, I think one of my biggest regrets on this podcast is you and I never got to record together, because you and I get so passionate when we talk about movies, and that energy is something I just thrive on. But it's also, as I'm listening to all of us talk, I can't help but be like, this has been a space for us as well. It wasn't just the content we've made. And to everybody who's listening now, that's probably not always easy because we think we have something to be said. But sometimes we needed the space to say something, and you allowed us to do that. And that has been beautiful, because one of my favorite comments from a friend of the podcast, Jen, she comes up to me and she's like, I'm listening to Boy Erased episode, and we're having a little bit of an emotional breakdown. And she's like, why are we talking about this? I want to hear about the movie. And then she kind of like tells the story where she comes to this realization of, this is space that they needed in this moment. And that's really great, because then you brought it back to the movie. And that's what movies do. They make us feel something, and they give us an escape. And I think you said it best, is like, I want to just sit down and watch a movie with my friends without having, sometimes I don't want to have to think about it at a deep level. Sometimes I just want to be like, I really enjoyed that, or I have nothing to say about this movie and I cannot come up with a single thing to talk about during serendipity. Serenity, not serendipity, serenity. But it's the deep conversations that we get to express. Our opinions do matter to us. And it's been a space that our audience has really given us time to process, time to be joyful, time to be afraid, time to be full of merriment, and time to be sad. And that's something that you as an audience, we can't ever thank you enough for, because you really have allowed us to have the space. But it wouldn't have been kicked off without you, Nicole, doing all this hard work and the numerous hours and thankless work you've done. And for you, Stacy, for really saying, yeah, we're going to do this. Let's push it forward. And inviting us in and wanting to broaden your horizons. I think that's the biggest thing, the biggest compliment I give to this podcast is that you didn't want to do the same type of movies. You wanted to broaden your podcast horizon. You wanted to broaden the diversity in which you spoke about. And you didn't just say, we're going to do it. You went out and sought people who could have better claims to those diverse claims. You really did something very special, and you two should be very, very proud of yourselves, as should the rest of us. But don't underestimate people when you have a good idea to run with it, because 9 years later, you're sitting here crying over talking about movies with your friends. And that's a beautiful thing.
I also want to add to the beginning of what you said, Garret, about all the work you do, Nicole, that how much you're very, I don't want to say like subtle, but like just the belief that we were like good enough to do this, and your encouragement, again, in like a understated, not like yeah, of course, let's do this like together, has meant a lot to me, to feel like that it was like good enough that I would be a good host. I know everyone else probably has felt the same way, but that's really been special to me in doing this. It's a big part of like, I don't know, like the organizing and everything, like just making sure we're like at our best by how you treat us and ask us to do this and everything has been really amazing.
Yeah, I think I had a conversation a little while ago with somebody about trying to plan these travel event experiences, and they were all these like sort of activities that the person was doing, planning, and I said to him, you should put something creative in the schedule. All the things that you're doing are just like doing a sport or doing an activity. Have some space for people to make something. And I think when this podcast came into my life, I was at a very weird crossroads, and it allowed me a creative outlet. And I don't think I realized how much I needed that. And I encourage anyone listening or who has listened to think about not just the stuff that you do, but the stuff that you make. And how, Garret said you can be at a party and be like, oh yeah, I have a podcast. Like I put something out into the world. And there was something so incredibly gratifying and fulfilling about that. And the purpose of having movies that matter and making movies that matter. That was, that is irreplaceable, and is another thing that's like, it's very hard to give up. The nice thing about it is that we made it. It's there. It's not going anywhere. You can still check us out. So it doesn't die with this.
Feel free to check us out at moviepod.com.
The website's probably going to go away. I don't think I'll keep paying for the domain name, but the podcast episodes will be on YouTube and on podcast platforms in perpetuity, as far as I can make that happen.
We've had a lot of great emotional times on this podcast, but I want to hear a time that really just made you laugh. I want to hear something so joyous that just take a minute. It doesn't have to be big, but I want people to also hear the joy we share.
I cracked up so much on a very non-memorable at all episode. It was my 5th one, Ocean's 8. Perfect example of like a nothing, it's not a horrible, bad movie. In a way, it's like kind of worse. There's like nothing there. It's just like empty calories to the extreme. And Nicole and I basically said all that. I want to make sure that James Corden's name gets in there. As like, it's really annoying that he was like a surprise at the end of that movie. Like he's in it. Like I'm supposed to be grateful. But anyway, we kind of said all that we had to say. And we're like, oh, cool. That's probably been like an episode. And Nicole, you looked at the time and it was like 19 minutes or something. Some atrociously short amount of time. We just like start laughing. Or like, all right, I guess we have to like figure out some way to pad this out. And I guess we did, because it's an episode on that exists. But it was just really funny to me. It's like, wow, we both are people who can talk a lot. And yet we didn't even crack 20 minutes on this one.
Bad. I can't think of a specific time. I do have a kind of a vague recurring delight in Adam trashing a movie. I think maybe it was Babylon. And you said something so poetic and cutting and devastating and hilarious. And you did that like 4 times.
Well, it's a no cursing policy makes you get out stretch the vocabulary muscles, You can't just, curse your way into making your point, right? You have to be a little bit more creative, which I always liked about this.
Yeah, no, that always made me laugh.
I think we've talked about kind of the other side of, seeing movies to keep episodes going, but as it was kind of mentioned with Wonka, that there's a fun part of, seeing a movie that probably is not seen by many, but then like you see it and you really love it. Or the movies that I was looking through a list of episodes that I've done, that have like, I'm not like fully forgotten, but have like kind of more faded from memory. Like, I think at one point Nicole said like Late Night was the most listened to episode or something, or was like at least in the top, and it was a good movie, but I don't think a lot of people saw it. And so, I mean, see it if you haven't checked it out. It was with I think Emma Thompson, and it came out like in 2019 or something. And then like Brittany Runs a Marathon, I think was the same year, and I was like, oh, these were like some fun movies. Like it's just fun to see something that kind of either surprised you or was just kind of like there for the moment, and then you moved on to other things.
I remember in the early days, I had so many moments where I would listen to the episode after it came out and realize like I had completely misunderstood what one of you was saying. Like I would listen to it and I'd be like, oh, I get it now. And I hear myself not at all get it in the moment. I was like, God, I'm an idiot. There's so many. I mean, I feel like I don't know how much of it made onto the recording, but Lexy, when we did what was the Korean adoptee movie?
Oh, Joyride.
Joyride, and we had to talk about all the like the what things in that movie would realistically give one an orgasm.
That was a good one.
I'm everyone here obviously has given me new insights onto things, but I remember because it was like our second episode, I think, Zootopia. I remember Stacy calling out portrayal of Southern voices in film like right away, and me thinking like, I've lived in the South and I sort of know it's a thing, but I am totally blind to it when it happens. And it was like, yeah, man, I gotta be more aware of stuff.
I'm just remembering a moment offline where we had some, I guess it was the Get Out episode. Some lady online like completely just ripped us a new one on Facebook, and you and I were so excited. We were so happy. And we were like texting each other, like just laughing and giggling, and we were just so happy that someone went online to disagree with us. And I think we may have even unironically told her so, and it made her angrier because she thought we were trolling her.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Like, oh, we're just so delighted to hear from you.
Lexy, you made me intrigued to go back, and I listened to some of my episodes to like get prepped for this, but I had forgotten some of the ones I had done as well. So now I'm like scrolling back through, looking at all the episodes I've done, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot I had recorded that. And going through, there was like, when we pick movies, we just pick a movie. We don't pick on who's coming up next. And I had like 3 in a row one time, and I was like, oh, okay, well, it's just gonna be Garret and Nicole talking again. But I remember, because my first 2 movies we did, Nicole, were The Incredibles and Christopher Robin. And they were like real child-friendly movies, and everybody was like, oh, Garrett's so cute and lovely. And then the next one I did was White Boy Rick, and like drugs and everything. And here I am just being like, oh, well, actually, I got my master's in this, and just like throwing stats and facts out. And people were like, excuse, is this the same guy who just did like the recording on the children's movie 2 times ago? Like, but yeah, I'd forgotten some of these, and that's lovely too. I usually listen to it once and be like, oh, I hate what I said. I don't agree with myself at all at that point in time anymore. But I mean, the fact that I'm having to scroll for 150 episodes is insane. Like, viewers at home, you should go back and listen to some of our deep cuts that we've said today, because those are some amazing episodes. And you can skip the ones that were probably your worst episode ever. Like for me, it would be High Life, a movie about sex in space. That was one of our most clicked but not listened to episodes when we went to YouTube.
We got some bot action off of that title.
Which apologized to Mr. Randy Jordan for having to be drugged to see that movie, the worst movie I think the podcast has ever had to endure. But it's also like, where did you go, Bernadette? will always have a special place in my heart, because the whole premise of that podcast that we did was how to find your creativity again and what is important at this stage of your life for who you are. And so I'm drawn back to that parallel right now. It's like we're moving on to something else creative, not taking away the creativity, just investing that time and energy somewhere else. And I also look back and I look at these episodes like, wow, I guess I just talk about mental health or children's movies all the time. Like the episode lists are like PTSD, domestic violence, recovery. And I'm like, oh, guess I have something to say about mental health issues often. That's interesting. But you've given me a space, Nicole, when we got to watch The Sound of Metal in a very early screening, right? We got to watch on the Amazon screening, and that was amazing to sit there and watch something, preview it, and then do it on the podcast before anybody else had seen it. And that was just like a really cool experience for me, because it's very personal, and it was an opportunity I wouldn't have got without this podcast.
Yeah, I will say it's not a one-to-one correlation. Some of the worst movies have given us some good episodes. You reminded me of Book of Henry, which was a terrible movie. But boy, do I quote that statistic I had to look up about how many cops are like domestic abusers. You know, it's come up more than once over the time since recording that. So yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes that has happened. Like, it isn't always the case that a movie was terrible and then the episode is terrible. But yeah.
Sometimes a bad movie has something good to say.
But High Life is definitely the worst movie I saw in a 9-year run.
I think theater moments for the podcast, my all-time favorite might be going to watch Logan at a Frederick. It was a Frederick, Maryland theater, and not only did a fight break out during the movie, but also on right is like at the sort of sad kind of funeral climax at the end, someone threw up in the exit aisle, and everybody had to jump over the vomit to get out of the theater. But then they all gave us free passes afterwards, so which I controversially used to walk right back in and watch Logan a second time. So that's probably one of my delightful movie podcast moments and memories.
Yeah, I think mine like recently was what episode did we just do? Was it Wicked? Where like Lexy was like, oh, and then some like middle-aged lady in the middle of my screens like screamed something out, and Garrett's like, oh my god, there was like a middle-aged lady in my screening that like shouted something out at that moment, and I was like, oh my god, I was the middle-aged lady who screamed it out.
But I do remember there was, I forget what movie it was, but as it was mentioned earlier, back when we had the rule of not seeing movies together so that the podcast was super fresh, I think like Nicole and we both needed to see a certain movie. And I think it might have been East Street where we went, and we both like sat like on opposite sides of the theater. Like Nicole was like closer to the front and I was closer to the back. And I remember going to the movie, and I think it must have been like a comedy or something, because I remember laughing during the movie, but then also realizing that I maybe shouldn't be laughing too hard because then it would spoil to Nicole what I was thinking about the movie. But I can't remember what movie it was. I just remember like us sitting not together, and then we like left the movie, and it was basically like, okay, bye, and then like depart. Because we didn't want to like talk about anything, so it was like the quickest goodbye we probably ever had.
I remember I had like a full-on emotional breakdown in the lobby of East Street. Now that we're talking about East Street, after Boy Erased, I just like had to sit there and cry for like 10 minutes. Like I was like, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything. I just have all these emotions to get out. Yeah,
that was a hard one to. I think before we started that podcast, I mean, that was a hard one for me just to like. We didn't know exactly everything that would be in that movie, obviously, and Nicole and I had to sit and like process a little bit before we recorded the podcast, because we're like, we aren't going to be able to get through this first take probably. But it's funny to hear all these like stories about seeing movies, because when we transferred over to Alamo and Nicole's like, oh my gosh, I can take notes now on the pads of paper. I don't have to take my notebook anymore. And I'm like, you're so adorable. Because I was not a notes person. I'm sitting there like, oh, I want to think about that later. I want to think about that later. And then going home to find my recommendations. I don't know if you guys ever struggled coming up with a recommendation, but I'd be like, how do I encapsulate recommending something from this movie into one thing? And it was probably the 6th or 7th podcast I had done that Nicole finally she's like, you can just give me one recommendation. It's okay. Because like at the end of every podcast, I would give like 3 or 4 recommendations, because I thought that's what she wanted. And she'd be like, you could just give me one from now on. That would be okay. And it was like, but I was like, oh, so sorry.
Everyone struggled. It gets edited out.
Yeah. But,
so you don't hear them be like, oh, crud, I forgot to think of something. Hang on, give me a minute. Like, that all gets deleted from the final product. So I can assure you, myself included, like every one of us has struggled to give a recommendation.
I know, even though I know the episode is coming, I know that I have time to think about it, and then I still don't, and then I'm like partway through the episode, and I'm like, shoot, what do I need to recommend? What am I watching right now? Like, I'll take anything.
And and sometimes you're talking about a point that you think you want to talk about, and halfway through the episode, you're talking about something completely different. You're like, well, that doesn't match my recommendation at all now.
I told you that once. That was a real struggle in the early days, is that I had so overplanned the podcast. Like I had scripted out in my head what I was going to say, what you were going to say, then what I would say back. And then I would sit in the recording and get really angry that you didn't remember your lines.
Well, my favorite, Lex, when you started, you had notes that you clearly were reading on the side of the screen. Like there was like a book report. She was like, let's see what I said here now. And I'm like, and I remember us being like, Lexy, it's okay. Let the notes go. You're doing great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was also why I wasn't listening as well in the early episodes. And I really had to train myself out of oversteering the episode where I felt like it should go and just letting the conversation happen organically. All right, final thoughts? And no, you won't have to give a recommendation either.
No, I think that would be beautiful. Give a recommendation. Yeah, I think
I think it would be a beautiful way to as well. Because I also haven't thought about it. So
well, my recommendation would be go back and listen to all the episodes you missed.
There you go. Go back and recommend your favorite episode. How about that?
Oh, that's a good one.
That we did, or
no, or that yours or somebody else.
Oh man,
I'm gonna do one of each. I'm gonna do one that I didn't do and one that I did do.
Okay.
The Barbie episode, you guys killed it. Hall of Fame episode. Really loved that one. And
thank you.
For one that I did, I'm gonna throw out Captive State, which is also a movie that everyone should watch. Came and went, but I thought it was really good, and I thought it was sadly very current. And I think we both had a good time talking about it because we didn't really know what to expect from the movie, and there was kind of a lot to unpack. And it was a really fun, like, alien movie as well. And I tend not to listen to my own episodes simply because I just cannot tolerate hearing my voice. I've listened to, I don't think any of them all the way through. But I hope that it comes through in that episode. I'm sure it does. How much sort of like fun we had talking about all the different stuff going on with the creative personnel involved in the movie, the themes of the movie, the both real world and then within the world of sort of like this alien invasion genre. And that was also, I think, the first one where it was like we kind of needed to see a movie. Like, I'm looking at all the ones we did before that, and it was all stuff like, oh, let's specifically do these movies that, like, I absolutely want to see. And that was the first one. Like, we'll go see this movie. We'll do this movie. So those are my two.
All right, I'm going to do two. I'm going to do deep cuts. So I'm going to do First, sorry to bother you and labor rights, because I was super a labor person in my previous life, and I was first, I love that movie. It was so bonkers, and I want everyone to see it. And second, I just was like, oh, I'm finally going to get to talk about this. And I'm like, let's talk about unions, and I was super excited. And then my second recommendation is going to be the opposite. So this is I guess, a haterade episode. So one of my favorites we did was the movie The Circle. We talked about privacy erosion, and it was me and Stacy and Jen, and we just hated that movie and had so much fun talking about how much we hated that movie. I mean, it was bad, but I particularly remember that episode as one of the most fun haterade episodes that we got to record.
I think mine have a theme of tertiary guests or people who are not even there are some, as Nicole mentioned, there have been some people who have kind of come in more regularly and then they leave to do other stuff, but I'm talking about people who just do one episode. And I think one that I really like is the farewell, which was Nicole, Christopher, and I think Christopher's friend Dan. I think that one was really interesting. The movie itself is very good, and then I think there was a lot of great commentary from Dan about, seeing kind of the things that happened, or the cultural moments, or different traditions from his perspective. I thought was really interesting, and a really good listen. And I think that's one of the episodes that even when I try to get people onto the podcast, I tell them to listen to the farewell. And then for mine also, speaking of Joyride, I really liked the Joyride episode. One, it was my favorite movie of 2023, just because it brought back the kind of great raunchy comedy with some, really nice heart to it. And we had Nicole's friend Monique, who told some of her story as an adoptee, and I think the fun aspects of the film plus Monique's perspective made for a really great episode.
Yeah, I remembered the Joyride episode and thinking that was just a really, really good one, guys. Yeah, I remember thinking that was quality when I finished. I think I texted you afterwards. I was like, that was a great episode, guys. Well done. But yeah, I remember for ours, I remember Book of Henry. I remember really, liking what we did with Book of Henry, and Get Out is a, kind of a milestone. And Across the Spider-Verse was just a joy to do with you guys. So those are kind of my sort of highlights that come to mind for me.
Yeah, Lexy took my favorite of others, which was The Farewell, so I will come up with another one now. But one that I was on that I really enjoyed, that was actually when we did, actually during COVID, our queer cinema coverage. And, those were really fun for me because we got to really see a lot of different movies that people thought about. And it all started, with that My Favorite Alien and the kind of cutesy kind of different types that we really started to see. And then Not Your Typical Fear, and movies that give us hope. And then sports movies. Gosh, I still cry at $1 Million Baby every time. But the queer cinema one really just, I think, was a different kind of take for the four of us. It was Lexy, Stacy, Nicole, and I, and just kind of sitting there and getting to talk about movies that really didn't really have a space at times. And so I thought that one was really, really lovely. As for the others, I mean, I'll never not enjoy the Reinfeld episode. So you guys did such a good job, and just loving hearing both of you kind of discuss it and how giddy it made you both. I think there was so much underjoy in that podcast from both Adam and Nicole, just really hearing.
And Justin.
The history and how much you really care about the lore of Reinfeld itself and the movie. But I'm sitting here scrolling and it's I could say ones I'd probably never listen to again. But most of them I'm
not do anti-recommendation
point there. And I'm remembering some of the things that came up during those times. Oh, right. I remember we had a long conversation about that for days afterward. We've when Oh, eighth grade. Eighth grade was a great episode too. I really enjoyed you and Christopher discussing eighth grade in that context because it was all about being overrated. That was the whole point. Like, don't overrate yourself to the point where you don't have anything to say. And so anyway, yeah, there's never really been a bad one to listen to. It's everybody has a unique perspective. And I think, Adam, you said it best earlier. I learned much better by hearing other people's opinions. I know what I think. I know what I want to say, but it really challenges me to push past those opinions and think outside the box. And I think you really created a space for that.
You had a good run.
So if I had a recommendation for the end of this conclusion, it's to do something creative with your life that pushes your boundaries, that teaches you how to do something new, that gives you an opportunity to engage with your friends, to make memories, to laugh, to make new friends, and really to give you an outlet for your creativity. And that is something that Nicole, Stacy, Adam, Lexy, Justin, Christopher, Garret, Spencer,
Suri, Jen
have all done. And movies are going to last forever, but the conversations I've had about movies will outlast any type of digital media.
Yeah, here, and and find community, right? Find your people.
Remember that this stuff is supposed to be fun, and listen to other people and listen to yourself because you are smart enough and interesting enough. And
gosh darn it, people like you.
Yeah. The royal you, whoever's listening, you too can do this if you want and have fun doing it, because otherwise it's work and nobody wants that.
Nobody wants more work. Yeah. Chase the joy.
Chase the joy, but I mean, again, we've had some real hard moments on this podcast, and that's been really worthwhile as well. And so I think, in conclusion, obviously, thank you to everyone over the years who participated in the actual making of the podcast. And thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for the people who have tuned in and stuck with. We did this for ourselves, but also for an audience. And the fact that anybody other than someone who is directly related to us listens will always be something that we treasure. And remember, movies matter,
and so do you.